look great. But
now that you mention it, I'm hoping that maybe I should write Dark Horse and say, where the hell is this? We want to see it in some kind of edition.
But you need to have a comic book to put it on the front of, really.
They could do a special edition or something like. I wanted to move on. The next topic I want to talk about would be just. You're British, and I was born in the UK, though I've been here for quite some time.
Yeah. You have a few some words here.
I was born in Andover, but I came over here around 15 years ago, so I've lost a lot of the accent.
Yeah.
Growing up, I did read a lot of 2000 AD. I wouldn't say I was a huge comic book consumer. I don't think my parents were too much into that. I remember getting a lot of the old, I don't really remember the names of them, the old smaller size format war comics that were kind of like, World War II, and I don't even remember the names of some of those.
Well, that was called Commando Picture Library.
Yeah.
That was really good stuff. I was never a collector of that stuff. I didn't like war comics.
I think my dad was into the war thing with war movies and everything, so I think that's how that came about. But the thing that interested me was you talk a lot about that when you were younger. You did really consume a lot of American comics, and that's what really influenced you.
Yes.
And looking back on my youth, I don't remember really seeing very many American comics that were available for me to purchase. I would, 2000 AD, but whether it was just me personally, is this?
I started collecting DC comics in 1960, and at the time, American comics were on those spinners, DC's, and then a couple of years later, Marvel came along, really, with Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and that they were always on sale. The newsagents had the American comics. They had Uncanny Tales, which was, I can't remember who published those. And a lot of sort of pulp things. You would have been buying them 20 or 30 years after me, so I really don't know what was on sale.
I think I blame my parents. I think a lot of my consumption I used to get a lot of those annuals, the 2000 AD annual at Christmas, or the Blake 7 annual, and that's how I really got a lot of my comic fixes.
One thing that did happen in the really in the 80s was the direct sales market. They somehow stopped selling comic books to the newsagents, and you just had to go to Forbidden Planet or one of the comic book stores to actually find comics. When people ask me what I do for a living and I tell them I draw comic books, they ask me where on earth you would go to find such things, because they're just not on sale at every newsstand anymore.
So that probably explains why I missed out on the whole American comics thing, because when I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, they weren't available, I guess. But I was going to lead into that in that, there was an explosion, I guess, in the mid to late 80s, I would say maybe. I would like to call maybe the British invasion of the American comic book industry, which you are definitely very much part of, along with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and everybody else. And it's just like, it's very unique that I think a lot of people might say that some of the greatest, if not writers and artists in the American comic book industry have been from Britain. And it's just what do you feel is the thing that makes the British artist or writer?
I don't know, really. As a kid, I was always a fan of the artists. I don't really remember many of the comic book stories, but I just loved certain artists. And it wasn't until people like Alan Moore came along that I suddenly pricked my ears up and found the stories were absolutely superb. I have the feeling that Vertigo, which is a section of DC, was almost a section that kind of evolved out of this influx of British writers. I could be wrong. That may not be the case. But I remember one American comic book artist saying to me that Vertigo was where all the whining Brits go to work. Because, Alan Moore at Vertigo? I don't remember. But Grant Morrison and Garth Ennis and all of those others. But there was some sort of, because we're not 100% entrenched in the American superhero genre, we had the European influence that came from all the things we were getting from the Spanish artists and all the artists who were working in Commando Picture Library and all the European people that we're a kind of sort of not quite in the American scene and not quite in the European scene. We're sort of somewhere in the middle. So maybe we had a kind of detached and slightly ironic view of the superhero genre. Maybe that's what it was.
I mean, definitely,
maybe just take a lot of drugs or something.
Because I mean, a lot of the British writers and artists, the sort of change from comic books to being more of a serious medium is, I think, really happened. That's a generalization, I guess. But one of in the public eye, one of the major shifts from comic books to being graphic novels happened about the time that a lot of the British artists and writers came over.
Well, who knows? I really couldn't say whether that's the case. I mean, it coincided with that time, I suppose. But then I think, I think graphic novels as a possibility were coming up at the time. Sort of well-produced, card-covered graphic novel. I mean, Frank Miller was one of the earliest men in that line. So I don't think the Brits can take too much of the credit. No, not really.
Now, back just to your work in Britain and 2000 AD stuff. I know I should get. One thing about Judge Dredd was something that I was very much into as a kid. That Judge Dredd has been a property that they've tried a number of times in North America to make it a huge property, and it was that movie that came out, the crossover comics. But I always felt that maybe North American audiences just didn't get Judge Dredd because it never really reached that appeal.
No, I don't think. I had a feeling that the US audiences didn't quite get, and we just quite simply put it down to the fact that we just assume that the readers of the US comics expect the hero to be quite clearly the good guy. I mean, even though Batman has a kind of dark tinged tone to him, he is the moral guy. But with Judge Dredd, I remember when I was working on Judge Dredd, and I think all the rest of us, we didn't really see Judge Dredd as the clear-cut hero. It was a bit like he was the apparatchik of the police state, and the crazy, crazy people that he was locking up were actually people like you and me. So our sort of moral standpoint when you read the stories was not fixed solely on him. It was somewhere probably closer to the villains of the piece. And that was a kind of slightly complex moral position to take when you're a kid reading a comic. You like your hero to be the hero. Judge Dredd was a kind of satire. It was a kind of an ironic thing, and just maybe they just didn't get it. But in Spain, Judge Dredd was created by a Spanish artist, Carlos Esquerra, and I don't think Judge Dredd was very big in Spain. Even though it was created by one of their artists. So who knows? Don't know. But the movie was terrible, though, wasn't it?
For some bizarre reason, I don't remember much of it. I actually went to see it an opening night at a midnight screening. And, I mean, hopefully they might try and relaunch that franchise in North America again, or you think that's a dead horse?
I don't know whether they would even consider it, really. I mean, the movie didn't help launching the character in the comic books the way the Tank Girl movie didn't help Tank Girl. I mean, Tank Girl is a fantastic character, what used to be a fantastic character, and she's actually coming back in 2000 AD. I think 2000 AD have bought the rights to Tank Girl, and I think she's going to be appearing as a 2000 AD character. Not by Hewlett and Martin. Jamie Hewlett is now half of Gorillaz, the band. I don't think I don't know, you'll have to ask him, but I don't know if there are any signs of him going back to Tank Girl. But anyway.
Well, thanks very much for your time, and it was great talking to you. And once again, I'm here at Brian Bolland, and this is RGB Filter.